Television cameras and reporters everywhere. Went on the train and set off. Mom didn't have much money. I don't think she had any. The Sisters of Mercy had given her some bread and peanut butter and milk and cookies at the docks. And we all got on the train and away we went. Just our luck that the CPR was on strike at the time, and it took us a long time to get to Toronto. 3 or 4 days. We sat on sidings in the freezing cold waiting to move. We were enjoying it. It was all new to us. We sat back and watched the strange frozen landscape pass slowly by the window. We were dreaming of our new life in Canada and wondering what was in store for us. The train finally arrived into southern Ontario. Marked the train at Union Station, and we were met by a bagpipe band and another crowd of reporters. Another big hullabaloo took place. We were bewildered by it all. What was it all about? We were the largest family on record. It was splashed all over the newspapers and the television. We were so tired, we just wanted to go somewhere and stop moving and get some sleep. You know, Mom was worn out. This is Colleen on the left and Liz on the right. They look a little dazed. It's been a long, arduous journey for them at that age. There's Mom getting a corsage and greeting, and Dad in the background. We had to hang around there for a while they performed the ceremonies, but we finally ended up taking a bus and going to the King George Hotel in Hamilton. We finally got our first night's sleep in a long time. Things weren't moving. Here we were in Hamilton, which is to be our new home. As it turned out, the family moved into a house on Forest Avenue a few days later. This is the street that we lived on, about halfway down the block. There's a press picture taken of Mom after she just arrived. She'd lost a lot of weight. She looked good. She was described as being very vivacious, and we lived across the street from a railway siding now. Trains going back and forth at night. Lived in a place called Corktown. Wasn't the greatest place. Here's Anne unpacking, getting ready for her new life, looking happy about it. Suppose she was kind of happy. So we had to live in Corktown. Corktown at the time was quite the place. It was full of what we used to call rubbies. Bums that used to go up the side of the mountain and drink rubbing alcohol. But we settled in as best we could and looking forward to getting on with it. I think Mom was a bit disappointed with the house, having left a beautiful place in Ashford and arriving here. But we get on with it.
Wonderful town, wonderful people, places to go, things to see. They're all in Hamilton. That's my wonderful town. Beautiful homes, schools and churches, entertainment, places to shop. My heart's in Hamilton. That's my wonderful town. Hamilton's the center of the Golden Horseshoe, giant of commerce and industry. Hamilton's a steel city, and of course you will listen to Radio CKOC.
Wonderful harbor, beautiful mountain,
botanical gardens, a sight to see. My love is Hamilton, that's my wonderful town. Hamilton's the hometown of the Ticats, Oski wee wee, eat 'em raw. There's the farmer's mart, and for the young at heart,
Hamilton has CKOC.
you can ride across the beach strip on the Skyway.
At McMaster you can get a degree.
sail or on the Mohawk Trail.
You can listen to CKOC.
In Burlington and Stony Creek and Dundas, from Toronto to Niagara Falls. Welland and Galt and Kitchener agree, they like radio CKOC. There's only one Hamilton, that's my wonderful town.
The wonderful shows on your favorite TV, Channel 11.
I think the whole city of Hamilton was excited about it.
Well, we finally arrived in Canada. There was a big blurb in the press, newspaper, the Hamilton Spectator. We went to CHCH television and had an interview there with the whole family. People came from all over and gave us all kinds of stuff, clothes, furniture, etc., etc. The house was in a nasty little neighborhood called Corktown. It's kind of a dumpy place. The house itself was overrun with beetles, mice. It was cold, cramped. When we first moved in, there was a family living upstairs, so we were all crowded into the downstairs. That lasted for about a month. And Dad had went and got himself a 1953 Pontiac sedan delivery van and started fixing televisions and installing television aerials, tried to make a bit of money. The kids did what we could. Those the boys, we delivered newspapers, and worked the delivery at the drugstore, and shoveled snow, mowed lawns, whatever we could do to make a few extra bucks, and the family struggled. We didn't have any money. We were in a strange country, but we had no way to get home, and Joe often said that he was able to get the money together to come to Canada, but he was never able to get the money to go home. But while we lived on Forest Avenue, there was 3 more children were added to the family to make 14. The first was Kevin Barry, named after an Irish martyr to the cause, Edward, and Thomas. Before Thomas was born, Margaret had moved out and married her first husband, Bob Turner, or Robert Turner, and had 2 children, Christine and Susan. Bob died young, tragically at an early age. And the kids all were enrolled in St. Patrick's School, which we attended, and church and all that. And we were always made to go to church, and Dad never went, Mom never went, but we were sure made to go. And after about 5 years, we moved the house down to 139 Victoria Avenue North, near the corner of Cannon Street. Another house. Dad had got himself another vehicle, which is a 1957 Ford station wagon. Drove that around like a king. Thought it was great. A flashy station wagon. And at that time, the boys started going to Cathedral High School. The girls went to Cathedral Girls High School. They did some Irish dancing. The boys, Richard joined the Air Cadets, and me, I'm Neil, I was in the Sea Cadets and the Naval Reserve. The next one to move out was Richard. He moved out and married his girlfriend at the time, was Nancy McCormick. At that time they had 2 children, a pair of twins, Kevin and Darren. And Kevin died at an early age, suddenly and quite tragically, because Richard had moved to British Columbia at the time and was living out there, eventually settling in Squamish. Had a couple more children. It was Garth and Colleen, and Garth died suddenly in some kind of an accident on a logging site on Vancouver Island as a young man, which was quite tragic. Then I moved out and I married my sweetheart, Elizabeth, Her name was Doyle. She was from Mary Street in Hamilton. And I had 3 children. It was Lisa was the first. Then there was Philip and Neil Jr. They're all still around today. They're doing very well. And then Ann moved out. She married Dale Scott. And her first child, which was the first grandchild born, was Dale Jr. And she eventually had more girls later on. She had Liz Ann, Leanne, and Rita Mae. And then Patricia moved, and she went to Yellowknife and met Jim Elson while he was working for the CBC. And she was a teaching career that she followed for the rest of her life, teaching elementary school. And they had 2 children. They had Jimmy and Margaret. And then Kathleen, she moved out. She married Bob Gratoli, which didn't last too long. She had 2 children. And Marie, she married, I believe it was Alec Ray, had 2 children, one of which passed away quite suddenly from cancer. She was separated and at the time, and her children were living in northern Ontario. And Colleen, she married a fella called Bill Irwin and moved out west. And Bill passed away just recently from cancer. And Kevin, he married Anne Marie. Had 3 children. And Eddie and Tommy. Eddie was taken from the family at a young age. He'd got in some bother with the police, and the social services became involved and decided that the best thing for them to do was to move the children, or move him from the house and put him into foster care, and basically never really returned to the family. He's now living in British Columbia. And the youngest, Tommy, didn't know too much about him. He got himself into some trouble too and spent a little bit of time away from home. Never really came back. I understand he has a couple of children on the West Coast, living around Vancouver somewhere. So everybody's kind of scattered all over. But while they were living on Victoria Avenue, Joe became ill. He was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. Shortly after that, they decided they were going to have a holiday in Ireland. Mom had never told them what was wrong with him. So they went over to Ireland and visited the family over there on William Street, and sure enough, while they were there, all hell broke loose, and there was a huge riot. It became known as the Battle of the Vogside, which you'll see some of the clips from that in a little later. Joe participated in it, claimed that he infiltrated the ranks of the enemy and manned the barricades, which to him was going back to his roots, living on William Street and rioting and fighting every night. But he eventually came home and went on with his life. He had a few jobs that he worked at. By this time, Mum or Ann had started working down at the Hamilton General Hospital as a medical librarian, but she pursued that career for a number of years. And Joe, he basically just kept fixing televisions as much as he could, but he was starting to become obsolete. His television repair was not a big going concern at the time. And one night he went to the club, which was the Wellington House at the corner of Cannon and Wellington. It was a few blocks from the house, and as he normally did, have a few beers and shoot some snooker or whatever. He was a very good snooker player. And he never came home. And when Mom went to search for him, found him at the police station, and the police had found him sitting in his vehicle at the back of the house, which is an empty lot over on West Avenue. And took him up, and it smelled a bit of beer on him, I suppose, and thought he was drunk, and took him up and put him in a cell at the police station. Of course, when they came in the morning and they could not rouse him and they knew something was wrong with him, they sent him to the hospital. So he'd suffered from a very severe stroke. Debilitated him. He became bedridden. And kept him at home, looked after him and nursed him as best she could, which she was very good at. And she sold the house on Victoria Avenue and bought another house up on Stone Church Road in Hamilton. And Joe finally, after a couple of years in bed, Joe finally wasted away, and he finally had a heart attack and passed away in 1976. So at that time, Mom decided she was going to live her life, and she went to Lake Worth, Florida, and spent a number of years down there looking after some old guy on the Intercoastal Waterway, which is a kind of a very affluent area down in Lake Worth. And I guess after a number of years, the old fella passed away, and she came back to Hamilton, got herself an apartment, and lived there for a number of years, and spent a lot of her time at the Senior Citizens Club in downtown Hamilton. Sadly, one day she broke her hip and she fell. She had a lot of trouble with that. Eventually ended up getting a hip replacement done, which helped her a lot. But she had a lot of fun when she was at the club. She was in the Geritol Follies, which is a group of entertainers that run around doing entertainment.